got this question from one of our clients, Matt, and I'll just read it to you and then we'll dive in and discuss. So the client just asked, he says, our daughters will be inheriting a substantial sum from their grandfather. I'm concerned that that amount of money might be challenging to comprehend and assimilate to, and was wondering if there were any creative ways besides just getting a big lump sum at a certain age that you know of or perhaps have experience with that will help determine if they are ready. So the question is, when exactly should your kids inherit money, and what are those determining factors? And thankfully, we got some thoughts about this. We got some thoughts, thankfully, from some people that have talked with people going through this situation, and then from our own experience with our clients. But we kind of came up with a ready to inherit test, if you will. And a lot of this is based off the book Raised Healthy, Wealthy, and Wise by Coventry Edwards Pitt, which Matt and I would definitely highly recommend.
Yes.
Everyone checking out. So we kind of came up with 5 questions that kind of help determine if your kids are ready to inherit. So, Matt, let's get into it.
Yeah.
So the first one is, have they demonstrated the ability to earn their own money in the present or at a point in the past? So the main idea here is work. I think that sometimes when you have a lot of money and you realize that you're unburdened, and then that means you just get to go on vacation 24/7. I think work is a really central component to us as humans and giving us purpose and freedom. And that could even be the case if that work is really mundane or impassioned. So kind of boring work in a sense. But yeah, work is really important.
Yeah, I think the definition of work is a tricky one because a lot of people hear work and they just think of, a 9 to 5, or, that's something that gives me a paycheck. And those are good things and certainly are forms of work. But I think more broadly, we have to consider things like a wife who's staying at home with her kids, or an adult who's taking care of their elderly parents, or any number of situations like that where there's certainly lots of work being done, but not necessarily set hours or a biweekly paycheck being factored in. But like you said, things like that give a sense of purpose and fulfillment, even if they're hard and challenging. In fact, in those situations, you tend to get more joy and fulfillment in the long term, even if it's more difficult in the short to medium term.
So if one of your kids is kind of the breadwinner for their family, maybe they're married, they have a spouse, maybe one of them's the breadwinner, they're working to provide for their family on their own, and then maybe the other one stays at home with the kids or something like that. I think it doesn't necessarily matter, who's doing which role, but the fact that core family is able to support themselves on their own by whoever's making the money, I think is really important. That at least one person's working at a job to provide money, and the other person's obviously working at the home, or both are working at jobs, whatever it may be. But the main key here is that they're paying for their own housing, they're paying for their own entertainment, for their own vacations, and that sort of thing. You're not supplementing those types of lifestyle choices for them. And what we find and what research finds is that the most successful folks were actually using very little of their inherited money. So they already had stuff that was covering their basics, and the inherited money was just kind of in the background and not really making an impact on their day-to-day lives.
Yeah, icing on the cake in a sense. And I know Coventry talked a lot about that in the book you mentioned, which again is really something we strongly recommend for anybody thinking about this topic or anything related. And that was a recurring theme throughout with the different family interviews that she shared, which is striking because it's situations where kids were in families and grew up in families that had lots of money, and something as simple as them having paid for the gas in the car that they got when they were in high school made a big impression that lasted a long time, or things like that where the parents instilled or gave the kids a chance to earn something like that, and how that made such a big long-term impact in a positive sense in the kids' lives.
Yep. And by kind of putting that practice in early, and they're paying for their own living expenses later on, then really the best candidates probably to receive an inheritance are those that don't actually need the inheritance. So number 2 is, are they motivated toward achieving personal goals? And I thought this one was really interesting because no matter how much money someone inherits, they'll feel cheated out of life if they haven't gotten to experience certain things for themselves. So it's kind of like what we were talking about before. If they haven't paid for their own gas ever, then they're not going to ever feel satisfied about whatever amount that they receive in inheritance. Because there's just those core basic functions of life that you have to provide really for yourself to build independence and competence in order for you to feel satisfied.
Yeah, one of the other things that struck me from Coventry as well, which I've seen, and I know you've seen, Stephen, in other situations too, is this idea of parents, which is this is a challenge, but parents letting their kids fail. And that's even harder for parents that have a lot of money, because it's so easy for them financially to step in and rectify any situation with money being added, because that can solve a lot of problems that kids can get into. But the point of kids failing on their own and then recovering and succeeding afterwards, how that builds self-confidence as they work towards various goals that they're trying to achieve, whether that's something professionally, starting a business or getting a job, or other sorts of goals as well. But just the idea that failure breeds resilience, which breeds self-confidence, and how the idea of striving towards goals is very much wrapped up in that.
Yeah. And we'll talk a little bit more about that of parents sitting on their hands, which is probably the hardest skill that parents need to learn, but probably one of the most important skills. We'll talk a little bit more about that here in a quick second. All right, so number 3 is, do they have a solid sense of self that is not wrapped up in issues related to wealth? And the idea here is, have they separated enough from their parents so that they don't find their identity based on a house that their parents live in, or the car that their parents drive? That's not who they are anymore. So they have separated enough of their identity where they basically have a sense of self and values that's of their own. When you're kind of looking at a progression of someone coming of age, say they go to college, they graduate from college, and then they start working in their 20s, this is really kind of the time of their life when they're trying to separate from mom and dad. College was obviously a huge first step, and sometimes people cut off parental support when college is done. But really, your 20s is when you're trying to figure stuff out. You're trying to, find a career, meet friends, maybe find a spouse, have kids, that sort of thing. And if this gets interrupted, so if you are still attached to mom and dad or family wealth or that sort of thing, then it can really kind of kibosh, I guess, your development.
Yeah. That is, I think that's a really big one, because the sense of identity that is apart from the family you grew up in is critical. And the 20s, especially, like you said, Stephen, is such a formative period of life where, for anyone who's been in school and gone to college, is now getting potentially their first full-time job and seeing what working's like as a full-time endeavor and everything that goes into that, and maybe switching jobs once or twice. And there's a lot of transitioning happening here. So yeah, definitely a very important phase of life.
Yeah, and I think that it's very easy to say, oh, people of wealth have it easy because you come from money, then you got all your problems are taken care of, that sort of thing. But that's not really true. If you come from money, I think that you struggle with probably feelings of guilt, of saying, hey, I got to experience stuff that no one else got to experience, or I got the car that I got is maybe a lot different from my friends' cars and that sort of thing. Yeah, maybe their money problems are quote unquote solved, but that doesn't mean that all their other problems are solved, and it kind of makes it a little bit more complicated and harder. So they need to work through that. They need to work through coming up with their own identity of who they are, separate from the wealth. Number 4, do they have the ability to overcome setbacks? And this is what we were talking about previously, Matt.
Yeah, I was going to say, I jumped the gun on this one. I was a little bit too excited. And couldn't wait till we got to number 4 to talk about it. But I do think it is so critical in the process of building self-confidence, is having anyone, but especially a kid who's at a formative stage of their life, go through failure and be able to come through the other side and get stronger as a result, which sounds really cliche, but anyone who's lived life long enough knows what that's like and how important that is to developing your sense of self and your self-confidence, such that you're now in a position of, okay, I don't need this extra money to build that.
Yeah. So when stuff goes wrong, that's not a bad thing. Which, just runs across every type of parenting instinct I think that we have. I know sometimes in our day and age, the things that parents get accused of, especially in probably grade school or middle school, is snowplow parenting. So, just basically clearing the deck for your kids. If your kid forgets his homework, then you drive home and pick it up for them and bring it back to them, or if they forget their jacket or that sort of thing. So trying to kind of smooth out the bumps, if you will, of their life so that they can, focus on their studies and that sort of thing. That's what we justify doing this stuff for. But the reality is they need to go through all of that stuff. They need to go through getting their knee skinned or getting a B- in a class. To really realize, okay, the stuff that I do actually has an effect, and I need to, kind of get my stuff together and make sure that I'm on the up and up. So I think it's really important that we don't, instantly dive in and save them from whatever situation or issue that they're dealing with.
And I think we'll talk about this on another episode, Stephen, because it is a whole nother topic of conversation. But another idea related to the ability to overcome setbacks, number 4 here, is the idea of financial support or inheritance being given to kids with parameters involved. And I think that comes to mind with something like setbacks, where a kid starts a business, a parent wants to help support it, they give some of the initial capital, and then the business isn't doing well, and all of a sudden the parent's in a tough spot of, okay, well, do I keep throwing money into this business that otherwise wouldn't survive on its own? And that's a scenario where, as hard as it is, especially if it's a financial loss for the parents having invested in the business, the right thing to do might be to let it die, let the kid try again or do something else, rather than potentially doing more long-term harm and more long-term financial damage to the parent's own portfolio by investing into a business that otherwise wouldn't be viable. So just one quick example of letting your kid fail and experience a setback, even in a situation like that where you could financially keep it going.
Yeah. I've some other situations that I've run across with clients. Specifically, I know that one child of a client was kind of getting on their feet and that sort of thing, and they allowed them to live at home. But one of the things I think that I would highly recommend parents do, especially if you have adult children, is to charge them rent. And what that does is it gives them the habit of saying, like, hey, you can live here, but it's not just going to be, freebie opening up the fridge and, have at it. But building some responsibility and some layers of saying, hey, you're an adult now, and we're going to treat you like an adult. So these are the expectations that we have for you. And it doesn't mean you have to keep the money or that sort of thing, but it could be, say, when they move out, then you gift the money back to them, which I think is kind of a cool thing. Another thing that I've seen is credit card debt. Sometimes clients' children rack up some credit card debt because of a wedding or something like that. And it's really easy for the parents to say, like, oh, like, we'll just pay it off. No big deal. And you really just got to go, all right, figure it out. And I think that's one of the hardest things to do. So we're trying to build the skills in our kids of resilience and discipline. And the only way that you do that is by experience. You can't learn in a book. You can't be told something from someone else. You got to do it yourself. Number 5 is, do they understand and can demonstrate competence of basic personal finance?
This is a biggie.
Yeah. So Matt and I obviously love personal finance. We can talk about that all day. But I think for this, and it doesn't mean that they need to be an expert, that they need to, you know, do their own taxes or even though that's a great idea, but stuff like that. You know, be an expert on all things investing. But have they done at least some sort of investing, or have they done budgeting for themselves? Can they plan for maybe a trip that that's coming up, budget for it and execute it without going over budget? Have they done some actual investing with their own money? So they had a little skin in the game, Matt, as like what we like to say. And experience some wins of seeing that money grow, and then also on the downside experience some losses, which inevitably happens in the market too.
Yeah, and I think another thing that comes to mind on this last one, number 5 here, is the idea of a test inheritance, which I think I saw mentioned in a Ron Blue book, but just the idea of, okay, maybe doing a little bit to see how it goes and see if they do really understand personal finance, like the stuff we were just talking about, managing a budget and cash flows and investing and all the things that go into financial success. So maybe some sort of step function where you do some now and some at a later date, I thought was an interesting idea worth bringing up.
So your idea would be to give them a certain amount, a certain lump sum, say, I don't know, wherever that is in your family situation, $10,000 or $50,000, and then kind of sitting back and going, all right, what do you do with this?
Yeah, the point being, if let's say a parent's going to give their kid $500,000, rather than necessarily feeling like, okay, well, if we feel like they're ready, let's just give them all $500 up front. If there's any uncertainty or reason to hesitate there, let's do 50 or 100 or 150 and do a part of it to see how it goes. And if it goes well, then maybe, okay, using that as more confidence to say, okay, now they're ready for the next chunk or the remainder of the balance, whatever it is.
Yeah.
Just making the point that it doesn't necessarily all have to be at once.
Yeah. Gotcha. Okay, so those 5 things, I'll read them again. Number 1, have they demonstrated the ability to earn their own money in the present or at a point in the past? Number 2, are they motivated toward achieving personal goals? Number 3 is, have they developed a solid sense of self that is not wrapped up in issues related to wealth? Number 4, do they have the ability to overcome setbacks? And number 5, do they understand and can demonstrate competence at a basic personal finance level? One thing that you'll notice here is there's no ages on these steps. So it doesn't say, hey, I know a lot of trust documents say you can't inherit money until you're 35, and then another chunk at 45, and another chunk at 55, which I guess is one way to do it. But I'm a big believer in that it depends on the maturity of the kid. But with that being said, I think that you should look really hard and think about gifting money or sending money to your kids in their 20s, because the 20s is pretty much a very impactful decade. I think there's a really good book out there by, I think her name is Meg Jay. It's called it's called The Defining Decade, which I think is a really great way to define your 20s. And saying that, hey, you're trying to figure out all the stuff of who you are, your job, career, all that stuff is happening right there. And if you add on to that and be saying, oh, by the way, here's $1 million, then it can complicate things.
Yeah.
So I would probably just caution against sending money down the line while your kids or grandkids are in their 20s and figuring stuff out. But beyond that, really, it's kind of up to their maturity level, and as we've given out in these 5 kind of things, have they hit those different criterias?
And to that point, Stephen, with age not being a hard and fast rule, the rule of thumb that an expert on the subject, Peter Evans, has shared is 35. And again, we don't suggest everyone start with that as a time and age to give money to your kids. But I do think it's a helpful rule of thumb to say, hey, if we're going to go younger than this, we need to feel really good that the kid is ready for it, because as lots of data and our own experience has shown, doing it before then has a lot of risk associated with it that starts to go down as kids progress through their 30s, like we talked about.
Yeah. And Peter Evans, he's worked with a lot of wealthy families, and then didn't he marry into wealth as well?
Yeah, he's a spouse of a 7th generation family enterprise. So talk about seeing all the dynamics involved with complexities of family wealth. And I think someone who's seeing a 7th generation family has probably seen it all at this point, as far as kids, grandkids, great grandkids, and all the different dynamics at play there. So he's seen it both through his own family experience as well as the consulting that he's done with families and multi-generational family businesses around the world. So lots of experience. So I think very highly of that age 35 rule of thumb as a place to start, with going lower than that, needing extra justification or extra confidence based on the kid or the kids and the parents feeling like they really are ready based on some of the criteria that we talked about.
I think the last thing that I'll say as we conclude here is you want this inheritance to be a blessing to your kids, grandkids, great-grandkids. And sometimes you get so focused on yourself of minimizing estate taxes, that sort of thing, that you forget the impact that it's having down the line. You might be thinking, oh, I'm blessing them with a whole bunch of money. But again, what are we trying to solve here? What do you want this money to help them go do? And if they haven't developed the skills and characteristics of someone who can receive this amount of money, then it's probably going to do more harm than not. Yeah, well, we'll wrap things there. Thanks so much, Matt. Thank you, Kevin, our producer and editor, and we will see you guys next time.
See ya.